Wow, today is a massive day for all fans of Hollow Knight and Silksong. We finally got the first lick of information in a long while, and it's huge. It's amazing, and it's monumental. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and dive pretty deep into some of the stuff from the gameplay trailer. This obviously won't compare to like Moss Bags. When he gets there, his will be a lot more in-depth, but this will just be like a quick baseline, some really cool things I noticed and were able to take away from just the trailer. Some lore stuff, some speculation, and also this is unscripted. So we're just going to roll with it, see what we see, and what we can spot out in this action-packed, incredible trailer. So right off the bat, we already know that we're getting this game sometime within the next year, judging by the Xbox post, where the Xbox employee said for all the trailers that were shown are the next year of Game Pass. So no longer do we have to wait for a Silksong date. We know that it will be released by June 12th, 2023, which is also pretty fitting because I'm pretty sure the first real Silksong release date theory was back when Taka made the video, and he speculated that it was going to be June 12th, 2020, I believe, was the theory. And that was a big date for a while because it was a placeholder on Steam, and people believed that. So it'd be really fitting for it to be released June 12th, 2023, or sometime in that span. So that's a pretty cool day. And then the first thing that happens in the trailer is we're thrown into this sort of forest biome, and there's actually a lot for just a little short shot. It looks really cool. The texture itself looks a little bit like the shell shards. It's this like more ancient, deep rock debris type style, and there's some pretty cool, looks like more passive type enemies, similar to like Green Path enemies, where they're kind of just meandering. So this, I would assume, would be early game, because it's not the craziest enemy AI yet. They're kind of just meandering, covering a distance, like bouncing back and forth. They're adorable too. I absolutely love them. And in the back, it's just some default statues and ruin stuff. And we see the little mask fly-like guys fly away. So that's probably an early game similar to Green Path type area. It looks really cool. I have no idea what this biome's purpose will hold in this game based on what we've seen. But that's probably lower in the map, far away from the Gilded Citadel. It looks kind of decrepit, starved of any civilizations. There's not too much to unpack there. The next thing, however, is absolutely massive, as we see a really cool platforming gauntlet where Hornet just sort of pogos on these little orb balloon things with their cool spin move, and they change shape. Those actually look reminiscent to the moss berries a little bit once they burst. So it could be similar to that, and I think all of these earlier shots are really close to the Moss Grotto area that we did start with the demo when Team Cherry released that. But this area looks a little more civilized. Like, I'd say this would probably be a further right room in the same biome as the last shot. There looks to be a lot of architecture. There's these cool looking statues with sort of no eyes faces, and they look similar enough to some of the background objects from the last shot, where we were with those more passive enemies, but they're bigger, more sort of Gothic temple architecture thing. Like, those look very much like statues made out of commemorance for something. So this could be an important climb up to a mini boss or an important, like, a sub area in that location. Similar, probably even more impactful than Stone Sanctuary, maybe more so on the level of Soul Sanctum. The wall cling looks absolutely amazing. I know in my Silksong Fears video, I talked about how I was concerned about movement for Silksong, just based on some of like the more animated looking things that we had seen from Silksong so far. But just from this shot alone, it looks really amazing and really fluid. Hornet does a double bounce on the right side, very similar to Mana's Claw, where you don't have to swing to a different wall each time. You can like multi-cling on the wall and gain height with that. And then she does like a cool push-off. Like, the animation for climbing the walls looks absolutely tremendous. So that makes me really excited about movement, and especially after that really cool pogo thing. Looks like there's going to be a massive, or a much more prevalent focus on some platforming, and I am all for that because the platforming looks great. Then we see another instance of the Bell Beast, who is our form of fast travel in this game. We learned a little bit about him or them, I guess, in the Edge magazine article, which if you haven't read yet, I highly recommend. There's so much to unpack there. It's gone relatively uncovered. I'll mention a lot of stuff from the Edge article at some point in this video when I'm breaking stuff down. That's another instance of him. He's our fast travel. It seems like in this game, instead of paying for fast travel of some sort of like formal infrastructure-based system, it's more natural. We have this Bell Beast who will have to fight in locations to be able to access their methods of transportation. And we meet him somewhere in like the Bell Barrows, I believe. And we have to fight him in like a long chase room, but we also might have to have some sort of combat encounter most times we find him in any of these locations. So that seems to be another one. And I'm pretty sure in all of the locations we have seen the Bell Beast, he is obviously surrounded by bells. So that will definitely have a lore significance. Maybe that's in some way he was similar to like a stag, where he was called by bells to be used as a method of fast travel and transportation. But we also do know that bells and music and pitch will have a massive impact in this game, lore-wise, as we know, like the bell cult and stuff like that. So these bells could mean something completely different about the Bell Beast's allegiances or backstory, more than just a simple ease of access method of transportation thing. And then the next thing we see is a really cool, sort of more escape sequence-esque thing. Hornet is on these like grinding, moving platforms with all these sharp spinning cogs that seem to have spikes on them that can damage Hornet, and it reminds me a little bit of the Tinker Knight fight from Shovel Knight, where you have that like moving platform that goes along the bottom spike thing and it just kind of grinds along the rails. It looks really intriguing, honestly. This seems to be more of a platforming gauntlet, and like I said earlier on, Silksong seems to be a lot more movement-based than Hollow Knight, which was very combat and exploration-oriented. This one seems like it'll have more sort of platforming gauntlets. Maybe it'll be more linear, maybe it won't be. Either way, I'm sure it's going to be absolutely amazing, and the world's going to be vibrant and alive and incredible. But we have seen much more emphasis on making more use of Hornet's advanced movement and her moveset, and using that to make some really interesting encounters. And this one looks pretty simple. All she does, I'm pretty sure, in this little clip is to just jump around and ride on the platforms which fall. But it does look really fun, and the architecture of that room is gorgeous. It's really reminiscent of some like old industrial city things. This is probably, again, lower in the world, earlier in the game due to her lack of any real upgrades. But it looks cool, and then again we also see bells. There's also the presence of a bell in this shot, or what appears to be similar to a bell in the top right corner of the screen. It also kind of gives room transition vibes, but that also is kind of just looks like the smoke that comes in, and I assume that like smoke / cascade thing, whatever's pouring down from the ceiling, is probably an obstacle that can damage you to make the platforming segment a little harder. But it seems to be coming from this bell, but that could also just be like a drum in a factory that contains like a molten substance or something. So I don't think there's too much to think into about that one. Alright, in the next shot, it seems we're also again in the Moss Grottos. And there's a cute little flying enemy who looks kind of like the cut enemy from the first game. They're adorable, and they kind of have little shell faces that remind me of some of the fools from the Colosseum. But we see like a geyser, sort of like an air geyser, that Hornet is riding upon and shooting upwards on throughout this room, which looks really cool and like a much more effective and quick means of moving around the map than jumping on those platforms. I don't fully understand the context of these geysers though. What I'd assume it would be is it's some sort of unlockable thing that you can do in this room, or maybe it's tool based, but judging on what she has, which is a Lifeblood syringe is on, and some sort of like extra bag, it looks like. I can't really make out what that tool is. but those don't seem like the types of tools that would create a gust of air or anything. So I would say this is probably just a feature of the room. Maybe it won't be there the first time because it's a little out of place. It also could be the way the textures are, it looks like water, but it's not flowing that way. Like, it's moving upwards, so it's definitely air. Also could be an ability that you unlock that allows you to make these geysers, but I doubt that. It seems more to be a unique feature of the room here. But it seems pretty cool, and I think that could be used for really fun platforming puzzles, kind of like the Jinzo tree, which was... Jinzo tree was my favorite part about Ori. It was just an amazing platforming little showcase, and was one of the best feeling moments in all of video games, I think. So that could be used to some effect in Silksong to create really interesting platforming puzzles. We also see, in the farthest left corner, a little dead husk-looking guy. Looks very similar to the wandering husks from Hollow Knight. You can see his top eye is out, and his bottom eye is just in the ground, like he's kind of buried and decaying there. And there's little strings by him in that alcove. Could definitely be a secret behind that wall. That's what that vibe is giving me. And then we go again to a cool cut with gorgeous little delicate flower-looking things, which we've seen quite a few places in Silksong. This is giving very similar vibes to the Lace boss fight, which we also will see again later on in this trailer. The second, I assume, Lace boss fight in the massive elevator chamber with all the roses. And so these flowers appear to be the same. They're kind of the same glistening white, pristine blossoms as the delicate flower from the first game too, but they seem to be more rose-oriented this game, judging by some of the thorny-looking vines in this room. But this also could lead to the assumption that there might be a rose area or sub-area, some sort of garden or a vineyard somewhere in Silksong due to the heavy presence of roses, as we've now seen this on top of the boss fight, and so this is probably some sort of little sub-area related to the lore, like the flowers could be heavily related to what's happening in Silksong. And this also leads me back to the HUDs in the top left corner. These are all tool-oriented HUDs. You can see right on where Hornet's masks are, there is alternation between some of the shots because you can, I assume it's crest-based, you can change what it looks like. For example, the shot where you're riding up the geyser is completely different and has like a three-pronged sort of thing on the end, while the one in the factory on the grinding platforms is a little more spear-based, a lot of pointy outcroppings, and that's all dependent on the tool she has equipped, because the bag could be some sort of upgrade to change the shape, but when she has the straight pin equipped, her HUD is just the straight pin through the masks, while this more rapier type, maybe that's the chainsaw we see on later, looking item changes the HUD to that more star sun-shaped little HUD. And you can also see the expansions of the silk spool, which we knew about from the Edge articles, as throughout certain of these shots, the size of her silk spool on the bottom increases, and the bar is there to inform you of when you can heal or use like a silk-related, not quite spell, but ability, which we've also seen in some of the other trailers where she's used the silk to make a more powerful move. And you can just see like it grows and shrinks on it, so I think this will probably be more of like a normal health up than how Hollow Knight did it. Like this one will probably be more statistically based, where like you can collect a silk up in the land somewhere and it's an extra 10 capacity, as opposed to collect 3 for a 33 capacity. So that's more instant gratification, which will be pretty interesting to play with. And I think that can make the Solstice Silk system a little easier to deal with when you have to do much more important silk preservation, because you don't have the luxury of doing only a 33 heal for an extra health. Yeah, and then we see more of those like pogoable little things in the flower room where you bounce off of it, which seems to be a pretty common theme. And in the next shot, we see another different HUD. This one looks really cool. Reminds me of like a soap dispenser or some sort of thing. It's really cool. Looks like a very Elden Ring type weapon, honestly. And that changes her HUD again. So I think the tools you use will very much change your style of play and like what's going on in your game, because the HUD is one of the most important things in games, and it really affects your doing. And in this shot also, she is likely in the deep docks, as you can tell by the architecture and the lava. And those flying guys from the room a few back with all the geysers are sort of there with a different sort of variation on their shape and their headpiece, crown, mask sort of thing. So that could be interesting to see if there's regional variants of enemies. But these guys don't seem to be too threatening either. They seem more sort of blundering, cute, low AI enemies. And she's just riding a platform here. Reminds me of the one we saw in the Deep Docks demo on the elevator. It's very much that aesthetic, but it's like a train rail cart going across instead of up and down like an elevator. And this is leading me to think a little more that we might get some platforming sections similar to in I Turn to Noctis, which was a really cool Metroidvania I got the pleasure to play earlier this year. That was heavily platforming based. It was absolutely brutal, but it was a very fun, enjoyable game. Anyway, back to Silksong. It reminds me of that, as it's kind of just like an elevator cart ride where you ride a platform and there's obstacles in your way that you have to platform around while staying on this platform. You've seen that a lot in a ton of games, similar to the Garpede Pogos in Deep Nest. It's kind of that, except with a dead mechanical object instead of an alive thing, where there is a central thing that will transport you through the room, but you have to make your way around the room, dodging the obstacles and staying on tempo with that. And we see a little more AI from these enemies this time, as they give pursuit to Hornet when she aggroes them. And then the next one is one of the coolest things that we've seen so far in this trailer. It's a sort of zipline type thing. Reminds me of some of those old like zip lines that you'd see at like a playground where you'd latch onto something and just ride it down a track. There's a little ring that Hornet throws herself into by throwing her needle into the ring. She allows herself to latch onto this thing and pull it, and she uses a silk spell or ability to do that, which uses some of her thread to allow her to latch on from a distance and grab onto it. I believe abilities like this will probably be relegated to, well, we've seen a lot of it actually, the silk attaching. She's been able to do it on walls, on enemies, and now on little platforming things like this hook, to be able to hook on and move and use that as like a method of transportation. Also, we see again the aesthetic is very similar to what we've seen in that factory earlier in the trailer, probably close to Greymore. Not like high though, I'd say this is still earlier game. And we see a cool little knife enemy guy who seems like a pogoable thing to maybe restart the platforming section. He's really cute, honestly. And the position of his knives changes depending on where Hornet is in the trailer, so it's kind of like an oblobble where he'll just like expand. And she's also has equipped the same tools in the last one, and her HUD is the same, except with a significantly greater amount of masks and spool. Like, as you can tell, the line in her silk spool is a lot earlier, where she probably has at least an extra full charge of silk in there, so she could probably heal 6 masks with what she has there. And also, yeah, she has, I believe, 8 masks in this, so that might actually hint to it being something later game, but we have seen this already in a much earlier game setting. So this could just be backtracking to find a collectible or a later sub-area of the same biome. And then we're on a really cute elevator that seems closer to the Gilded City. It was a very dramatic and climactic one, so I'd be interested to see where that takes us, but I'd probably say into the Gilded City, or like one of the big boss fights or dungeons of this game. And then it starts actually being combat oriented, which is awesome. We see a couple of bell cultists in this first shot, and they look absolutely amazing. One of the guys is really similar AI to the winged fools from the Colosseum, where he's kind of giving aerial pursuit with a sword to Hornet, and we see her just do an absolutely awesome move here, where she flips herself, and it looks great. And I think it's absolutely awesome. And she hits the other enemy too in that sort of flip thing. It's a very ninja type, like, cooler move, and she's able to damage multiple of the enemies here. We also see a lot of corpses here. It looks like an enemy gauntlet. This might be a pre-boss thing, because this is definitely a room meant for battle, judging by the locked doors and some of the architecture. Like, this gives climactic encounter on the way to something, though. So this could either be like an area boss, or this could just be a very big enemy encounter before something bigger. And yeah, the Bell Cultists look amazing. I assume that flying guy whose face we can see is with the Bell Cultists, just in a different manner than the ones who cover their faces in the gold and with the bell insignia on them. But his face looks also more like a mask. Like, it seems kind of like when you put a paper bag over your head and use a mask like that. That's the types of vibes I'm getting from that. And then we see one of the cool... I believe this is one of the guys that we've seen before from the Scholarly Sanctuary, or whatever it was. In this next shot, we've seen him and some of his acquaintances in previous Team Cherry posts when they posted enemies 160 and so on. So he's part of that scholarly suite, and we see he has a shield on him, what looks to be probably a magic projecting object. He does use it for melee in that picture to do a large swing, but the overall aesthetic of that item looks more like some sort of talisman that you'd use to cast a spell than of a blunt object. So I could see him being more of a mana from far away, but he will use the melee in close. And the shield is really cool. He has very similar AI to a lot of the shield enemies in Hollow Knight, where you can just kind of get behind him, do a little damage, and when he swings, there's a nice downtime to be able to damage him. This again leads to some of the stuff we've already seen in Silksong, where it's a lot more emphasis on, like, cleverly placed hits, where you can't always just cheese someone by going above them and staying on their head, which we saw in the Deep Docks. And I assume this guy's headpiece will be the same, as it's that thick metal thing, where you won't be able to damage him by just staying on top, and instead you'll have to work around to be able to do damage. We didn't actually see Hornet hit him in the head, though. She just bounced off his shield. But that is how I assume any of those headdresses will be, just to make combat a little more interesting and difficult as we have to work around obstacles. Also, there's a couple of corpses in this shot that seem to be covered by ash or snow. Judging by Kingdom's Edge from the first game, I'd put this more as some sort of snow and ash instead of anything else. Or ash instead of snow, as it's probably more of a morbid thing than a geological thing, as we don't see much evidence of snow or frozen anything by this. Yeah, and then next we are able to see cute little mouthy guys. They kind of give the same bone type aesthetic as the Bell Beast, who is our method of transportation for this game. It's that same bony, segmented sort of look on these guys, and they also come down from the ceiling like the earlier factory scene, which leads me to believe that that also takes place in the same factory as the first platforming segment, the moving platforms. And then we get our first, what I believe is a shot of the Gilded City, and judging by just some of the gorgeous architecture, the lighting, the colors, and it looks absolutely incredible. In the background you can just faintly make out a lot of what look like gorgeous, large spired buildings and all of that stuff, and overall the lighting's amazing. Another really good job by Team Cherry, and the textures look pretty awesome. And there is another Bell Cultist at this part of the Gilded City. I think they will be a massive adversary that appears in a lot of places throughout this game. And in this one, Hornet only has 6 masks. So the Gilded City, like we've been told that the Gilded City is an endgame thing, but I think it could be less endgame than we think. I've heard a lot of speculation by other Hollow Knight creators that the Gilded City, you might be able to access it really early, and that like it's only about like half the game, like a flipped castle from Symphony of the Night sort of thing. Where even once you get there, even though that was your objective, once you get to this objective, there is a lot more to uncover, a lot more to do after it, and it will like fundamentally change your playthrough when you get there, where it's like kind of a different story once you get there, and you have a much different motive and inspiration. It's going to be a big moment. And we also see Hornet here use a really cool jackhammer sort of move, using the item on the right in her inventory, which I'll just call like the jackhammer. In here she kind of wraps her cloak around herself, similar to some of Nightmare King Grimm's attacks when he would just shift himself and throw himself as like a knife at the knight. And she does this to do some damage downward on the bell cultist, and I think it looks really awesome. Like, that seems like it'd have some really fun practical implications. But the thing with that is, I don't know if the response after it, where Hornet jumps off the character, will be manually triggered, or if that's something that you will have to do yourself, or if it will automatically happen every time you use the move. So that could be a little difficult to control, just tying it off so that you don't take contact damage after using the chainsaw down. And we also see her using one of our favorite tools, the Pimpillo, to kill the other flying bell beast in this picture. In the next shot, we see more of that gloomy aesthetic that we've seen in certain frames from earlier. This reminds me most of the enemy from the first trailer, who spewed all of the purple little infection globules or whatever that was. This area definitely seems really creepy, as we can tell from the frog demon thing on top. Those glassy, beady eyes are really terrifying, and it has like a cloaked sort of lying down body that kind of blends in with the background. So I think this could be a really creepier, darker biome, similar to Deep Nest, where it's kind of more uncivilized, or the civilization is a more dark, morbid, like hiding in the shadows type of thing. Because this does definitely give me a lot of that same creepier, gloomy aesthetic, which looks awesome. This could also be a part of Greymore, because we do know that Greymore is the biggest undertaking Team Cherry had taken from one of their earlier blog posts, and that it's larger than Deep Nest, which I think a lot of areas will be, just due to Hornet's massive size and speed, so they'll have to have constraints to work around all of that. Another really interesting thing that I noted in this picture that I'm sure a lot of you guys also saw is the Lifeblood syringe. We knew that the Lifeblood syringe was a tool in Silksong, but she used it in this picture, and it seems like it's a multi-use thing that you can use a few times to give yourself extra little injections of Lifeblood, because we can see based on the meter on her HUD that has the Lifeblood syringe icon on it, that it's only around like 60% of the way depleted. So we can infer that she probably used about like 2 uses of this already, and maybe it's a 5-use tool. And that's really awesome, because some of these tools could have a lot of value, being able to repeatedly use them in a couple of different situations to make it happen. And there's some sort of mini-boss here that Hornet takes care of, and when she kills it, the enemy gives off a ton of silk in a pretty large cloud, similar to what we saw from Moss Mother earlier. So I assume this is some sort of mini-boss. It looks a lot like a star-nosed mole, actually, so we can see a lot more non-bug creatures in this game based on that logic. And then we see a large ant warrior, probably of the same tribe and class as some of the other warrior ants we saw, and Carmelita and stuff like that. Looks like a really cool character. It is also atmospherically wise. It has some of the Moss Grotto aesthetic, but this is probably one of those transition border zones where we're on the edge of 2 biomes, which I would assume would be the Moss Grotto area or an extension of the Moss Grotto area into whatever the, like, Ants Dominion is, which I could see being actually more of a full-fledged area than a sub-area in this game. Just the emphasis and all the stuff we've seen of the ants, from their, like, whole coliseum to their whole structure, I think it'll be larger than the Mantis Village was in the first game. Because I could see, with just the sheer amount of architecture and stuff they have built, that instead of being a 3 or 4 room offshoot, it could be its own sort of really well-developed, well-explored, fully-fledged thing. And Hornet uses a really cool tool in this thing where she throws, I think, 4 tacks and uses them to hit the larger worker ant there. These tacks seem to kind of have like a parabolic move set, definitely influenced by gravity. They're not one of like the straight pins that don't just fly in a straight line until it hits an enemy or a wall. This seems like it's much more influenced on like a short range, higher damage thing, kind of like a shotgun in any sort of larger AAA games, where you'll have to get in close and use a lot of these and hit the enemy quite a few times if you want to do a lot of damage with it. But when used correctly, it seems to be like a pretty impressive, large damage amount. So that looks like a lot of fun. And also it seems to have quite a few uses, again, judging based on the usage in the HUD itself. And that enemy looks really large and cool, and that's more ants, which we love seeing. And in the next shot, we see Hornet using a lot of the spiky, expandable ball thingies that we saw in the prior trailers, which seem to be both very helpful with combat as well as with platforming, as we saw Hornet being able to pogo off that in the first game, which could be used for some amazing cheeses. Like, I think part of what's taking Silksong so long to release, as I've said in prior things, is just how hard this game is probably to balance and to find exploits and get rid of soft locks. Because in Hollow Knight, there was a ton of things and a ton of variety you could have with your character and how you played it, but the movement, you had a ton of places to go with each ability, but you couldn't really do much in terms of sequence breaking. Like, it was very basic, and everything had pretty simple movement laws where you couldn't super exploit anything. But in this game, it seems like with all of the physics properties of all these items, will be used a lot to be able to exploit and get into new territories. Like, if we just look at things like the fireball, in recent years it has found such a life in the speedrunning community for all of the things it can do and all of its properties. We've already seen fireball tricks being used a lot just to skip ledges and to use the stall mechanics and just that extra bit of knockback to be able to get onto ledges and into places that weren't thought possible without having dash or any of those things, and using those physical properties to move on. But having all of these items where you'll have knockback from throwing a pin, or maybe an explosion cloud from a pimpillo, which could be used to make Silksong's versions of E-pogos, which were a really helpful thing in Silksong, or Hollow Knight, and using that to be able to get into new areas in Silksong would be cool. And then there's also the unanticipated ones, like Stall Ball, that we found 3 or 4 years after Hollow Knight had been out, and no one had used it until really recently. Some of these discoveries could be huge in Silksong, where you find out that something has a secret hidden property where it can stay on screen or change your character's elevation, and being able to really exploit that into being an extra movement trick that can skip stuff. So I think speedrunners have their work cut out for them in this game, but I think that it'll be in a fun way. There will be a lot of stuff to lab, and routes will be very subjective. Like, I think in this game it's a lot less... I mean, at a point, it will turn into one definite route that was found to be a lot faster and have a lot of stuff. But within the first couple weeks of this game, I think speedrunners will be trying a ton of new things just to lab a lot of cool tricks with all of the little tools and finding new shortcuts. And I think it'll be really cool to participate in and watch, and it'll be a lot of fun. Another thing I noticed in this picture are the spear/javelin things. I believe we saw this, and maybe even this exact shot in the Edge magazine. So I remember a pond scum-ish area that had very similar aesthetic to this, and I do remember the spear thing from past things. But the Hornet's spear tool that she has seems very similar to the spear that this flying little guy uses to throw at her. So I think that could have a pretty cool effect. It's like a javelin, longer distance type of weapon for Hornet to use. And then when this guy dies, we also see him drop some shell shards and some rosaries. And rosaries are the new Geo. For anyone who didn't know, but I'm sure you guys know a ton of Silksong stuff after studying all the stuff in the wait. So she gets a decent amount of rosaries from that, and also some shell shards, which are used to replenish tools when you're at a bench. And then we go to everyone's favorite shot in the game, the thing we all remember from the demo, the little gauntlet in the deep docks with all the bell heads and flying bell dudes. It's really cute. There's not a lot to take away here. There's the reminder that there are certain parts of enemies that you cannot hit because of things blocking them, which would be an awesome combat thing. The only real thing of note that I saw in this room was quite at the beginning of the clip, where the straight pin is stuck in the ceiling for a while before it decays. There's not a lot to note there, but it's cool. I noticed it. And maybe stuff like that could, again, be used for speedrunning tricks, just exploiting that cooldown time where it's stuck in the wall before it goes away. Yeah. And I think just everything artistically looks incredible in that room. Seeing one of the straight pins go from the flying guy, and it has really well animated physics and all that. So I think just having seen some of the stuff for it, it just looks really cool, and I'm impressed by just the dedication and pride that Team Cherry puts into all this to make it look as amazing. And then we see something really cool. I would say if what I've said before isn't Greymoor, this is 100% Greymoor, just based on some of those more Gothic, Edgar Allan Poe looking flying enemies we've seen in the prior Silksong teasers we've gotten. This looks to be a really, really cool enemy. Probably a boss, judging just based on the aesthetic of the room and the size and just the fact that he is the only one there. Gives a lot of boss energy. His design is incredible. He has like a pronged fork, not a trident obviously because there's more than 3, but he has a really cool pitchfork type weapon. I think the 5 could definitely be used as some sort of deep meaning, as in Silksong seems to be a very cult-based game where there's a lot of, in the Kingdom of Farloom, there's a lot of groups and organizations that have their own symbolism and ideology, and that's one of the major divides of the kingdom, and this 5-pronged fork could be a part of that, similar to how the bells are already a symbol and all that. So that could be a really cool lore thing in that. And I don't know, this enemy looks really cool. He burrows into the ground, which was absolutely awesome. Like, he just looks like a genuinely fun enemy to face, and we see Hornet use her bind there, which is just kind of what we remembered. The next clip is one of my favorites and one of my absolute takeaways from this trailer, is there's a ton to unpack in a really short amount of time. First off, on the right wall, those faces are absolutely terrifying. It's on both walls, actually. It's like Alien. It's like that character from like Alien Isolation. It's very much like a freaky, terrifying alien face. I'm terrified to see whatever those guys end up being, if they're bosses or NPCs. Like, that's gonna be a very freaky character to meet, and I think that character will have a pretty big impact too. Like, this looks like a sub area or something where those guys clearly have a large influence, judged by just how many of these faces are scattered all along the walls. So that will be probably a pretty big influence in the deep docks. Maybe these are some of the overseers or the people that own the mines and any of that stuff. So I think that's going to be a pretty big thing to look out for. But the main thing to take away from this is just the amazing escape sequence type thing. We didn't see in Hollow Knight a lot of these climactic escape sequences or any of that. That was much more an Ori thing, where you would have a timed thing and an entity chasing you. But it seems like Silksong will, as it's leaning a lot more into some of the platforming-oriented stuff, will have some of these escape sequences where you have a force coming after you and a time limit and like an auto-scroll. And I'm interested to see how that's implemented. It wouldn't have worked really well in Hollow Knight in its world design, but with Hornet's really quick pace and the way she moves, it could be really cool to see it implemented in the world, as long as you can still, like, backtrack through these rooms. Or this could be more something like when we're in the worm's body in Kingdom's Edge, where the thing collapses in on you, and once you've been in the worm's body and you get the item, you can't go back. And that'd be just a pretty cool thing to be able to see in this game, a little more of that, because I thought that was an interesting little change of the world. Also, the enemy variety here is pretty cool. There's enemies shooting little projectiles at you the whole time, so it seems like this will be a pretty hard escape sequence, but these guys also die when they touch the lava, which is a great feature. It seems like there will be a lot more of these environmental enemy kills, which I thought was really cool in Hollow Knight and helped make the world feel vibrant and alive, was the fact that there were falling stalactites that came from the ceiling, and you could use those to damage entities in the world, or if an enemy fell into spikes or acid, they die. And I think that was a really cool thing that helped Hollow Knight's world, and I think it'd be really cool in Silksong. Also, this platforming gauntlet just looks awesome. We can see that there's spikes on top of that platform that Hornet has to dodge, and that'll make for a lot of really fun, really difficult movement. Also, there's another elevator. Not much to talk about that. There's just some large, impactful elevators in this game, I guess, that lead to bigger, cooler things, like large climactic things. Then we see some sort of church. That shot really reminds me a lot of the Hollow Knight The Sanctuary fan game that a lot of people were working on in this game. As she's on this shrine, there's a lot of candles. It's very much that aesthetic, but there is so much to unpack in this just teensy little screenshot. There's a lot of scissors, which makes me assume we are in Greymoor. Scissors are hugely impactful in this game, as I believe that they'll be used as kind of the thing that is the antithesis of silk. The scissors can cut through and stop any strings and strands of silk, and we've seen in the past certain of the enemies of Greymoor would carry these scissors and attack with them, as that's probably their primary method to stop the silk, because it must go against their beliefs or whatever, as the Greymoor seems like a very religious little sect in the game that's probably against the Weavers and might be responsible for their imprisonment in this game. Also, the candles make this seem like it's a very sacred place. Like, this whole room gives a very sacred aesthetic. We see, obviously, the arched ceiling that gives a very chapel-type feel to the room, just based on the architecture. There's a lot of little windows or cutouts in the wall that are also church or, like, vaulted ceiling shaped, made with candles, all in, like, a triangular pattern. So it's almost definitely a place of worship. There's a lot of wax in this place. And then the strung-up scissors, which we see strung up very similar to the way Nosk strings up his victims. So those might be like ceremonial scissors that had served like a purpose or done something before, or this could just be like a ceremonial one that's used as a display. And then the most important thing in this room is there's a little corpse. God, this is what 50 minutes straight of talking does to your brain. There's a little corpse on a pedestal, kind of similar to the Dreamers, though I'd say this one is definitely more dead than asleep. Body looks very limp. There's a sheet covering it, so that's probably like some sort of body bag or remembrance for the dead. You cannot glimpse the face, again, probably out of remembrance for the dead. But I would assume that this is more of a sacrificial victim than anything else. Like, that could be a sacrificial sheet to put over the victim before they die. Because this does not really give, like, worshipful body. Like, it definitely seems more of a ritualistic room, and everything here was used for some sort of twisted ritual or sacrifice or something, judging on all the candles, the weapons in the room, and Hornet seems to be taking something from this body. So that could be maybe an item, maybe a power, some sort of dreamer type thing. Like I said, the Weavers are very important here, so that could have a connection to the Weavers, just judging by all of the scissors around. That could be a former Weaver body or someone highly connected. But Hornet seems to be binding and channeling some of the silk or whatever energy was inside that corpse, which is cool. And then we see a really cool looking flying guy who I'm pretty sure we've seen in the trailers before, but in a different spot. The bird looks vaguely familiar. He actually reminds me a lot of the flea. This whole room is giving me the very flea caravan type thing. As we know, the fleas are part of the Caravan, who's a character we've seen in the past due to Left's amazing riddles, which gave us so much insight on Silksong. So this guy could be a part, maybe an antagonist of the Caravan, could be a member of it who's just a little crazed. He looks really cool, looks like a really fun fight, but it's this room, which is very much, what we've seen in prior shots of the Caravan room. Like, we've seen this with Chakra in the first trailer, we've seen this one in the Caravan screenshots, and now we see it with, the two guys that we've seen prior in some Silksong updates. These guys are Garmund and Zaza, who are characters we've seen in the past in the, I think it was the second blog post that Team Trey made, just giving some basic details about Silksong. And these guys seem to be really important, probably important side characters that we're going to have quite a few quests with. They seem to be helpful bugs that will help out in our conquests and our fights, but we could also find ourselves helping them out a lot of times. So they're a little team. They're on a quest to discover a new home was one of the things from the past blog posts, and they seem really cool. Garmin seems to be carrying like the spear, but it also kind of looks like a vuvuzela or one of those old like things you blow into to get a noise. Like, I don't remember what those things are called, but one of those. So it seems to have a dual purpose as both a musical instrument and as a instrument of destruction and violence, which seems to be like a kind of double-edged thing in this kingdom, no pun intended, is a lot of the things happen to be both used for fighting and for music, as we've seen Hornet use her needle as a guitar in the past to play music. And music is at the center of this kingdom. So yeah, he's actually in that screenshot it seemed like he wasn't helping out as much as maybe going against you, as Hornet parries off of the attack of Garmin and Zaza. It'll be interesting if that's more of like a Shield Knight from Shovel Knight thing, where it's an assist that you have to use like combat mechanics on an ally to be able to damage it. But I know in the first game you weren't like parrying off of Coral in that fight, he was just assisting you straight out. So they could be antagonists in that fight, and that could be like the first time you see them or something like that. Which is really interesting. There'd be a lot more cool moral stuff going on in Silksong that way. In the next shot, we see a really cool depiction of the last judge fight, which was something we've seen in the past. He was actually introduced in the Edge magazine as a really cool boss. I know a lot of people were incredibly psyched when they saw this guy. He just looks like a really, really cool fight. There's definitely a ton of lore behind him, just based on the name The Last Judge, or it was something similar to that. Just really cool. There's definitely a lot going on with him. I would love to uncover his story and how he relates to things. He's probably a member of that scholarly suite, like I've mentioned, who seem to be like a secluded, outcast sort of group in Farloom, who are probably dedicated to studying some mysteries or pushing forward some message, but they seem to be like a secluded sect that we've seen mainly in their own territory. Like, all the times we've seen characters with this sort of aesthetic, they're in their own, this similar type of atmospheric area. So they're probably very secluded to where they are as compared to the members of the Bell Cult, who are very widely spread out. Hornet also uses a, like, missile-looking thing here. She kind of shoots it, and it works similar to the stalactites from Hollow Knight, but it goes through the last judge, which means it can hit multiple enemies, I'm sure. It seems really cool, and it kind of just goes on like a bouncing path where it hits off of a lot of things and can ricochet and deal more damage. It'd be interesting if that's a tool where the more ricochets you get, the better it does with damage. So that seems to be like a really cool thing that you could bounce around with and just make some absolutely broken damage combos with, which would be a lot of fun. It actually leads really, really well into the next clip, where we see Hornet fighting two burrowing enemy-looking things that kind of charge at her, like like a drill, and will go through the wall. But the reason I think it's so interesting that those two clips went after one another is that Tool in the Last Judge boss fight has a very similar art direction to these bosses. And Team Cherry doesn't do a lot of things coincidentally. Like, they don't accidentally make one thing similar to another or have, like, similarities. Like, you remember how Mossbag does floor lore, where he will base off certain entire guesses and theories based on the texture and the art in the floor. Like, Team Cherry does a lot of things so very intentionally. They pay so much attention to the details in this game. So the fact that the tool looks very similar to these guys probably means they're connected. Like, that could be a reward for beating this boss, actually. Or it could just be found along here as, like, similar to Baldur's Shell, like the remains of a dead version of one of these. And I think that's really cool. Some of those more, like, specific tools as a reward from things could be really fun. Being able to get a tribe's specific weapon or fighting style or something like that would be just absolutely awesome. There's so much to do with all of that. We also see Hornet using the bind damage thing that we've seen in the past, where she does sort of the bind thing. It's the AoE from the first game that she used in both her Kingdom's Edge and her Green Path fights, and uses it to pretty cool extents to damage those enemies around her. This also seems like a boss, probably less of like a major boss. Like, I think other than the judge, I think most of the ones they've shown so far have been pretty minor. They don't want to spoil, obviously, the big bucks and the really cool fights that we'll get to witness in the game, but it still looks like an absolutely awesome fight, especially for probably what'll be more of a small boss. And it seems really fun. The next enemy, however, seems to be less of an unimportant boss. Really, really cool. This guy ties back to one of the first clips we saw in this video, where Hornet was in a sort of moss grotto type area, and there were a lot of statues, the same statues that are displayed inside this boss room. The statues likely represent this guy, who has a pretty sick haircut. Yeah, so it's really cool. It looks like a kind of old religious type building, very old crumbling architecture with grandiose pillars and a lot of statues. It gives very religious vibes. And this guy has beady eyes, like a lot of the enemies we've seen before. The beady eyes could be some sort of thing, kind of like the infection in this game, maybe. Like, people can't see or see clearly, like they're bothered. Maybe that's part of what the haunting is in this game, is that beady-eyed sort of thing, where the people can't, like, think clearly, similar to, like, the White Lady, where there's something going on that affects her sight. But this guy seems like a major boss. He's probably one of the highlights of the early game Moss Grotto type thing. He might be the main boss in the Moss Grotto when you actually reach this secluded temple or whatever it is, and he seems a lot of fun. That's one of those major entities that we've seen in the games where it's just been completely different from Hollow Knight, where it's a much larger boss scale-wise, where it's not like one arena and your character stays the same. It's just a massive towering presence with like large sweeping attacks. And I think that'll be a pleasure to fight. That's really cool. And there's not too much to unpack still in that thing. Actually, that reminds me of something I meant to say earlier. In those red stalactite drill guys, there are a lot of the bells and insignia in that same shape as the as all the guys from the Bell Cult. Like, that is very much the staff they use, and those were dangling around the arena. So these guys could be infected by the noise or whatever's happening in the kingdom, or that could be their protection against it. I just thought it was a really cool thing to notice. I'm not really the best lore speculator in the world. But yeah, that boss looks absolutely tremendous and climactic. And the next thing we see is everyone's favorite, cannibalism. Cannibalism was present in the first game, Hollow Knight, as well. Team Cherry's kind of really morbid and terrifying, and they love just leaning into these dark themes like cannibalism. Here we see sliced up bodies in the corners and ladles, which are probably meant for eating the dead bodies. And there's a lot of carcasses from the ceiling in this room. So there's a lot of morbid stuff going on. It looks like we're fighting the head chef of whatever morbid institution this is, as he's carrying a ladle, probably from the rack in the right corner, and trying to attack Hornet for intruding or whatever. He has wings too, which are really cool. I think that looks like a really fun boss fight, and I did kind of love the Pleasure House thing. It added a new, just like, secret, dark society of Hallownest thing, and it really gave you a glimpse and an insight into the lives of people in that kingdom, and that seems, again, prevalent here. I'm wondering, I believe that bug in the left corner is probably alive, just hiding in this couple of those at the room. So that could be really cool to explore. So that looked absolutely awesome. And then we see another thing. We've seen that character before in smaller forms. This just looks like a more evolved version of that enemy, which we saw before in the Deep Docks demo, in the same room as that flea. So that's probably the boss version of that, or like the elder of a race of bugs, whatever race that ends up being. But this is a very cool, bone, dark aesthetic. We see the corpse of a fellow one of them in the corner of the room. Yes, there's a lot there. It seems like everything was incredibly well thought out in this game. Like, all of the things we've been shown look amazing, very well planned out, and that boss is just part of that. And then we see the lace fight, second lace fight, and not a lot has changed, which is good. It looks very similar to what we saw in the first trailer with the lace fight. The elevator's still there, the pipe, all the flowers. So the flowers are still like a very important thing. All of this is still going to be really important to Lace's story. Because those flowers remind me a lot of the little birds she sort of conducts in parts of her fight. So it'll be really interesting to see how that takes, and the fact that Team Cherry didn't change this makes it seem like how very conscious a lot of these decisions are and important they are. And we also see Hornet using the same tool that she's had equipped throughout a lot of these things. And then we're back to the fight with Garmund and Zaza, where they defeat that giant flying thing, and that's the trailer. Hollow Knight Silksong. So there was just a ton to unpack there. There was so much going on. There was a lot of really cool world design, a ton of new bosses that we got to witness, cool new areas, a few new tools. Yeah, there was like a lot of new stuff that we got to see, and it was great to just be able to be informed on Silksong. It'd been so long since we got anything, so it was awesome that we were able to get a little insight into Team Cherry and see all the amazing stuff that they'd been working on, and the fact that we know it's going to be within the next year is mind-boggling. Like, we've been waiting on this game for a while with a lot of high hopes, and it's just a cool confirmation, affirmation type thing where it's, yeah, we'll have this in the next year, build up some hype, and we'll be able to really start digging in deep on a lot of this stuff and getting ready for Silksong to release. At the point where it's now a year out, I would say there's a high chance that it's a finished game, a polished finished game. I think they're probably doing a lot more of the play testing and final tweaking and balancing right now, but like the content is made and set in stone, and everything in this trailer looked very, very polished. Like, there were moments in the first trailer where you could see stuff that wasn't done with the best polish yet. Like, they were kind of just trying to get stuff out, but it probably wasn't done in the real game. So there were just like little inaccuracies and weird bugs and stuff going on. But everything in this trailer looked incredibly polished, even after watching it 7 or 8 times at really slow speeds and just being able to unpack it all. There's a ton of hard work and dedication that's went into this in making such an impressive product. And I'm really excited to see where all this lands. I think this also definitely doubles down on some of our thoughts about the bell cult being really important and the importance of the weavers and silk and scissors in this world. There was a lot, and I'm just absolutely so happy that we were able to witness this today, and it was a great affirmation. I hope you guys liked some of the details that I was able to point out in this video. I tried my best to do as well as I could, point out as much, and try to glean as much as possible from this amazing trailer for all you guys. So thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. I want to grow this channel a lot. I have some really crazy stuff that I'm planning on doing in the future, so a subscribe would help out a ton to be able to keep on making high quality videos and getting some really cool projects out in the future. So yeah, thank you. Have an amazing day, and I hope you enjoyed that trailer and trailer reaction as much as I did.